I am so excited to announce that I have released the first official tarot diagnosis spread book. Tarot and Self-Discovery is a therapeutic tarot journey with over 200 spreads, including over 152 card prompts and over 50 robust tarot spreads. You can purchase a physical copy on Amazon or a digital copy at thetarotdiagnosis.com. You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. I have been thinking a lot about the Ten of Swords lately, and specifically how it represents a culmination of suffering. I feel like it's been popping up a lot in my personal pools, in artwork. I mean, even my partner and I have the Modern Witches version of this card hung up in the living room on the wall. Where it says, everything is fine. And it's got this person with 10 swords in their back. And they're just like, rolled over, scrolling, doom scrolling on their phone. It's such a wonderful card because I think it speaks to all of us. It's a card that evokes such a deep and universal feeling of pain and dread and defeat. And I'm laughing because it's just like, oh God, we've all been there. And I think every time we pull this card and we see this card, we just know, oh yeah, you can feel it. But yeah, so I've been thinking about this card, and I feel like this card can also be seen as a metaphor for this, internal process that leads to this self-inflicted type of defeat that we see in this card. And that self-inflicted type of defeat is an experience that I think we are all very familiar with, in addition to being familiar with the pain of the Ten of Swords, and that's self-sabotage. So if we start to take a deeper look at this Ten of Swords archetype, we see that, or maybe not see, we can experience the anxiety of being perceived or judged can actually be pretty metaphorical, because the person lying on the ground, with all these swords piercing through their back, I think speaks to the anxiety or the external experience of anxiety that we see in the Nine of Swords. So if we're going in order of the sword suit here, for example. And so this level of defeat has then been preceded by this external level of defeat, rather, has been preceded by this internal process of self-sabotage where, we are driven by just fear of criticism, judgment, being perceived by others. And that fear then unintentionally ends up preparing or creating an actual experience of failure. Even if when we were in that Nine of Swords moment, we didn't have any actual evidence that the failure would inevitably happen. But when we get to this Ten of Swords and we're viewing it through the lens of self-sabotage, with the Nine of Swords, what happens is, we think that this thing's going to happen. It's going to be really bad. People are going to judge us or criticize us, or we're going to fail, even though we have no evidence of such. And then what happens is, the stories that we're telling ourselves, and the sword suit is the cognitive storytelling suit, influence, and this is just basic cognitive behavioral theory, our thoughts influence our behavior. So we are unintentionally then creating moments of failure, creating these moments of discomfort, because we've created the story already in our head. And because of the way brains work, we are more likely to experience something that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about. Even for example, when I just said earlier, I've been thinking a lot about the Ten of Swords, and I feel like the card's been popping up a lot. I feel like I've been seeing imagery that alludes to the card in certain places. And that's because my brain's hyper aware of the card. It's been on my mind. And so, yeah, I'm more likely to see it, or if I'm pulling it, even if even if I'm not actually pulling it more often than I usually am, my brain might be like, oh my God, you're pulling this card a lot. What does that mean? Just because it's on the forefront of my brain. And unfortunately, with the way, this type of cognitive process functions, is that because our behavior or our thoughts tend to impact our behaviors, if we're having these Nine of Swords thoughts, then we end up having a Ten of Swords experience by way of maybe avoiding or refraining from taking chances or pursuing new opportunities because we are worried about maybe the opinions of other people or, a possible bad thing happening. And then we end up in this cycle where, like I said earlier, because we have this thought, it affects our behavior. So in this instance, avoiding or refraining to taking chances or pursuing new opportunities is then inevitably ensuring this Ten of Swords moment where we are experiencing our own defeat or our lack of growth, complete stagnation. I see this so much in my therapy practice. And really, even personally, this dread of being criticized, fear of rejection, this deep fear of rejection, or really even just being perceived by other people, even if it's not negative perception, just being seen can trigger really harmful self-sabotage behaviors, which then, kind of reinforce these destructive themes that we see in the Ten of Swords. And, so in my therapy practice, and like I said, I've absolutely been there myself where, maybe we have this mindset of, well, everyone is going to think I'm a failure. Everyone is going to think I'm stupid. So I might as well just not even try. And it's this fear of judgment that can lead to self-sabotage because then it fosters that avoidance I was talking about earlier, but also procrastination, and then reinforce these self-defeating beliefs that we have. So the person who fears judgment may end up isolating themselves, avoid pursuing their goals or avoid engaging in behaviors that, could potentially lead to successes because they're afraid of the failure or they're afraid of the judgment or the criticism that could come with it. So we can see then how this fear of judgment, this cycle of self-sabotage really leads us to then undermining our own potential. And then we're just digging deeper and planting deeper roots of this self-sabotage cycle. And then we end up just existing in a world of self-fulfilling prophecies that are rooted in failure and rejection. So we know that at its core, self-sabotage is basically when we are obstructing our own well-being, our own success, our own personal growth, and our own evolution. But we can take this a step further by viewing it through the lens of Carl Jung's work and his discussion on the concept of the shadow and projection, because his work actually provides kind of an interesting framework for understanding or exploring some of the deeper psychological implications of this particular archetype of the Ten of Swords. Because, we know that the shadow, for example, represents these unconscious aspects of ourselves that we have denied or repressed, usually because they have been deemed socially unacceptable, or at some point in our life, someone has made us feel like it is not good to be exhibiting, these traits or these characteristics or these behaviors or these thoughts. And then projections. So the concept of projection is projections of our shadows specifically can occur when we are unconsciously attributing our own feelings or desires onto others, because what happens is we want to create this space, this kind of metaphorical or even literal physical space between the material that has become part of our shadow and how the outside world is perceiving us. So in the case of the Ten of Swords, that fear of judgment can be seen as a projection then of potentially our inner critic. And we're projecting that onto other people. So what happens then is, we might believe that other people are going to very harshly criticize us. when in fact, this fear, this fear of judgment is really a reflection of our own internalized self-criticism or self-judgment that we have not tended to yet. So by projecting these fears onto others, there's a few things happening. We avoid taking responsibility for the work that needs to be done with the shadow. And then we're perpetuating a cycle of self-sabotage because we're avoiding situations where we might be judged. Simultaneously reinforcing our own negative self-image, avoiding potential for growth, potential for just expansion personally. And so there's a lot of really interesting things that could be happening, within this container of the Ten of Swords as self-sabotage, fear of judgment, fear of criticism. So there's so many ways that, self-sabotage ultimately can lead to these self-fulfilling prophecies. And I kind of want to shift now into pulling cards because I feel like, there are so many archetypes, of course, within the tarot and I feel like every single card, honestly, I could pull any cards in the deck and there would be some form of self-sabotage or fear of judgment that we could find or extrapolate from every card. So I kind of want to pull cards now. I feel like I've just been talking too much about Ten of Swords and self-sabotage. All right, so let's just pull and see what comes out, and then we'll talk about that card as a form or projection of self-sabotage, fear of criticism. So I'm actually using a brand new deck that I have not ever used on the podcast, and I don't even think, maybe I've posted it on Instagram, I can't remember, but it is called the Pulp Girls Tarot Deck, and I was recently just in Flagstaff, Arizona for a week, working on my shadow work book. It is very exciting. That will be published by Wiser within the next year. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be posting more about it as that time comes. But so I was walking around downtown Flagstaff, which is just absolutely adorable. And they have amazing little shops downtown. And so stopped into one and I love a good deal. And this deck was on sale for a very good price. So grabbed that. And I love it. It's super cute. If you are a subscriber of the newsletter and you got the announcement of this episode, then you also got to see an image of the deck and the cards that I pulled. It's super cute. A very inclusive deck. All right, so let's see what comes out. All right, the Page of Pentacles. I love the pages. They're probably my favorite of all the court cards. But I do think there is a ripe material here regarding self-sabotage. The Page of Pentacles has this connection to, of course, curiosity because it's a page, but there's a curiosity of learning. And I feel like, this is interesting because my initial instinct is that this represents a fear of how others might perceive our interests. And then, so if we have this fear of others, how others might perceive our interests, things that we are curious about learning, we might then decide not to take any sort of steps towards exploring these interests and figuring out if we actually do like it or what that means about us. And so I'm thinking about a few clients that I've worked with over the years, both teenagers and adults actually, who have expressed interest in certain topics or joining certain communities or wanting to expand their knowledge on certain schools of thought, but have been weighed down by the fear of what others would think of them if they pursued learning more about these interests. I'm actually really glad I decided to use this new deck because this Page of Pentacles shows a person, of course, the standard position with the page holding out this pentacle, but they have butterfly wings really large on their back. And I think this speaks to the lack of transformation that happens when we are stuck in the Ten of Swords version of the Page of Pentacles. So these self-defeating thoughts, this fear of judgment, we don't get to experience that full transformative quality that occurs when you engage in something that is very exciting or could unlock different areas of your brain or your identity or just ways of existing, and instead feel like maybe you have to conform to your community or the people who are around you in order to avoid criticism or judgment. I kind of want to pull another card now. Let's see what else comes up. Also, side note, this deck shuffles like a dream. Like, it is an incredibly satisfying shuffle. I feel like this is prime ASMR content. All right, let's see what else. Oh, I just got something that flew out, so we're going to go with that. All right. Oh, another pentacle. All right. This time the Four of Pentacles. So the Four of Pentacles is typically associated with control. We're holding on very tightly to what we have. We don't want to lose it. We don't want to let it go. We don't want anyone to take it from us. And what's interesting too is, so this particular image does mimic the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, where we have this person kind of, sitting on some sort of just like stool, square apparatus. And then there's, it looks like a fairly large city in the background. So there's also this removal of, being in the community and being amongst their peers. And there's a sense of isolation that exists here. So self-sabotage through this archetype, I think, manifests through a type of rigidity, this kind of refusal to change or maybe even let go of control because there's this fear of losing stability or predictability. So this is actually interesting because if we look at this in conjunction with the Page of Pentacles I just pulled, there's almost a fear of doing something different and maybe being outcasted, for example. But then, if we look at the Four of Pentacles, this tells us that this form of self-sabotage gives us a false sense of security and control. So at the Page of Pentacles, there's this, I'll be safe if I conform. But then the Four of Pentacles tells us that's actually a false sense of safety. Because what's happening with this rigidity is that, again, we're keeping ourselves stagnant. And I see this Four of Pentacles experience a lot in my therapy practice because, not only is there the false sense of control, the false sense of safety, but also familiarity because, with self-sabotage comes the ability to predict an outcome. And that's something that we don't talk about enough with this because, again, going back to the Ten of Swords, and Nine of Swords, we've created all of these stories of what if and what could be in our head. So we feel like we are able to predict what's going to happen, which then means, we feel like we can have some sort of control over our environment, over our nervous system, over the outcome. But again, that's a false sense of security and a false sense of predictability too, because, by holding on so tightly to these pentacles, we again are blocking ourselves from growth and from personal evolution. All right, let's pull again. Maybe I can get a card that's not a pentacle. All right. Knight of Wands. This one actually feels complex. So my immediate thought is, of course, one of impulse and excitement, because this is very much a card rooted in just a pure, primal, bold enthusiasm. But if we're looking at this through the lens of self-sabotage and also through the archetype of that 9 and 10 of Swords, then, we can see that the Knight of Wands is insecure about their abilities and fearful of judgment. So really, they just want to get it over with. Whatever it is they're doing, they just want to get it done and over with. They have the thoughts. They don't want to simmer in the thoughts anymore. They would just immediately see the, poor outcome that's going to happen. And because of that, there's this utter lack of planning and preparation. And because there's a lack of planning and preparation, they're now way less likely to experience success or a positive outcome. So you can see how this Knight is setting themselves up for failure. They're just charging forward, no real kind of foundation or, plan of execution, just going to kind of see what happens. They have this idea, this urge, this sense of excitement. They're just going for it, which, without the planning and without that solid foundation is likely to end up confirming any of these feelings of inadequacy or fear of judgment when things go wrong. So we can also then see how this, leads to a reinforcement of some of these self-destructive patterns. All right, well, let's now pull a card to explore working with this experience of self-sabotage. Let's see if we can get some guidance on what to do, especially if we recognize ourselves in this episode or recognize some of our own patterns in these cards that I've pulled. Oh, interesting. The 2 of Cups. Okay. The 2 of Cups. This feels like a parts work card or honestly, a go to therapy card. That's what it feels like. But in all seriousness, I think, if we look at this card and we look at it next to the 10 of Swords, which was the inspiration behind this episode, we see a really powerful juxtaposition. So if the two of Swords, or actually if the 10 of Swords represents, these feelings of defeat, represents this isolation, the self-fulfilling prophecies of self-sabotage, then the 2 of Cups next to it almost looks like the antidote, that the Band-Aid, the balm, and it's offering compassion and connection, not even necessarily with others, but maybe different parts of ourselves. So this could be, a nudge to say, hey, it's time to do some shadow work. It's time to connect or find some compassion, not only for the shadow, but also for the inner critic, because that's also very significantly at play here. So ultimately, when we think about exploring, processing, or even trying to overcome self-sabotage, I think what the cards are suggesting is that it requires a courageous willingness to confront our fear of judgment, as well as our self-destructive behavioral patterns. And because this was inspired by Swords, also to confront the stories that we've written about ourselves and that we continue to tell about ourselves without recognizing how these self-fulfilling prophecies, the self-sabotage behavior, and the fear that we have, without recognizing how that distorts our perceptions and our behaviors, we're not able to create any sort of meaningful change or break any cycles. So really, to take this full circle, in this case, then, the 10 of Swords can be seen not only as this symbol or culmination of defeat, but also as a call to action. Because what's happening here is that the 10 of Swords is encouraging us to really examine, to really look at the ways in which our fear of judgment has led to self-sabotage, and then look at what steps we need to take towards acknowledgement and eventually healing. Thank you so much for listening to the Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow the Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails, where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.